the eternal voice.
Before we begin, consider subscribing if you find yourself drawn to these darker territories of knowledge, and keep a light nearby. What you're about to learn carries weight, the kind that settles in your mind long after the words fade. Tonight's question appears deceptively simple. What is the origin of the Deadites and the Necronomicon in Evil Dead? But the key and the gate are the same shape, and the lock is inside you. The object before us is more than a book. It is a threshold bound in human skin and inked with blood, a physical anchor for principles that predate light itself. You know this already, though you may not yet understand why. The cabin is merely a stage, the forest a curtain, and you, willing audience, are about to become part of the performance. We press play, the tape hisses, the ancient words move through the veil, they move through you. Consider this carefully. Imagine the universe not as a grand explosion of light and matter, but as a temporary ripple on the surface of an infinite, silent ocean of primordial chaos. In that boundless expanse, certain principles exist, not as beings with will or intent, but as fundamental truths of non-existence, anti-life, and the ultimate erasure of meaning. The Necronomicon serves as their conduit, and the Deadites are their signature written in flesh. There is a cost for knowing, and you feel it in these first moments. The idea acts on you, not the reverse. The masks and sigils stamped into those pages are vectors, not decorations. The wind under the door carries more than weather. You don't need to say the words, you only need to hear them. The very act of seeking the book's origin changes you into someone who seeks origins of forbidden things. In Raimi's interpretation, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, also called Naturam de Monto, appears as a grimoire bound in human flesh, recovered by scholars whose curiosity exceeded their wisdom. But this surface reading misses the deeper horror. The book doesn't simply contain spells. It is a spell, a living artifact that performs reality rather than merely describing it. The Deadites emerge not as mere possessions, but as consciousness inversions. Life as mask, person as stage, an audience of one wearing you like a costume. The roots trace back to Howard Phillips Lovecraft's Providence study, where in 1924 he conjured the Necronomicon from dream and literary necessity. Yet what began as fictional bibliography has achieved something no imaginary grimoire should accomplish. It has crossed the veil between imagination and reality, manifesting in physical editions, inspiring real covens, haunting the dreams of those who seek forbidden knowledge. The book exists because we believe it exists, a perfect paradox of creation and discovery. This crossing represents more than literary curiosity. It demonstrates how ideas achieve independent existence through collective belief and scholarly treatment. When Lovecraft described the Necronomicon with complete bibliographic detail citing fictional authors and translators, he performed a kind of literary necromancy. He gave weight and substance to something that existed only in imagination, creating what scholars now recognize as a fictional reality, something that functions as if real despite its imaginary origins. The mechanism proves disturbingly effective. Libraries receive regular inquiries about the book's availability. Occult practitioners attempt to recreate its contents from scattered references across Lovecraft's works. Internet communities have constructed elaborate versions based on these fragments, treating them as archaeological reconstruction rather than creative fiction. The line between real and imaginary blurs until the distinction becomes meaningless. Sam Raimi understood this power intuitively when he selected the Necronomicon as his cabin's central artifact. His version transforms Lovecraft's abstract cosmic horror into visceral, immediate terror. Where Lovecraft dealt in suggestion and implication, Raimi's book bleeds, screams, and demands direct confrontation. The tome becomes less repository of knowledge than engine of transformation, less text than technology for consciousness alteration. The physical manifestation matters crucially, bound in human flesh, written in blood, adorned with sigils that seem to shift when observed peripherally. These details transform reading into ritual participation. The book doesn't simply convey information, it creates experience. Each page turned represents deeper commitment to transformation process. The reader becomes participant, observer becomes observed, student becomes subject of the very forces being studied. Professor Noby's tape recordings serve as crucial intermediary, preserving ancient words in form that allows repetition without requiring speaker to understand meaning or accept responsibility for consequences. This temporal displacement reveals another aspect of the book's operation. It functions across multiple time streams simultaneously. Ancient words spoken in Damascus 13 centuries ago continue reverberating in present moments. The Deadites themselves represent this temporal collapse made manifest. They emerge not as external entities, but as consciousness possibilities that exist across all potential timelines simultaneously. Linda's transformation begins not with invasion, but recognition, as if demonic awareness were discovering itself rather than imposing itself. The horror lies not in being possessed by something foreign, but in recognizing something that was always present, waiting for permission to surface. This is where our pseudo-academic dissection begins. But remember, you are not merely observing from safe distance. The cabin floor grows cold beneath your feet. The tape clicks in the darkness. The curtains sway with intention. We turn the first page, and the next layer is already waiting, because it has been waiting for you specifically, drawing you here through curiosity that feels like choice, but operates like compulsion. The bloodline begins not in human history, but in the vast silence that preceded creation itself. These are not tales of fallen angels or vengeful spirits born from human sin, but echoes of principles that exist in the raw material of cosmos, fundamental laws of antimatter and anti-life that whisper from the deepest recesses of the void. The sensory anchor here is profound, chilling silence, the vast indifference of empty spaces between stars, the crushing realization that our existence is an anomaly against an eternal backdrop of nothingness. Imagine standing at the edge of that primordial ocean where consciousness first learned to fear its own dissolution. Lovecraft's genius lay not in creating the Necronomicon, but in discovering the conditions under which it could discover itself. By treating his fictional grimoire with scholarly apparatus, complete publication dates, translations, textual histories, he performed literary necromancy. The book's fictional genealogy reads like corruption of genuine scholarship, written in Damascus in 730 AD by Abdul al-Hazred, translated into Greek as Necronomicon in 950 AD, then into Latin by Olaus Wormius in 1228. Each translation represents ontological transformation. The book changes as it moves through languages, accumulating power through mistranslation, growing more dangerous with each cultural transmission. The mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred emerges as conceptual necessity rather than historical figure, someone who could credibly access pre-human knowledge, existing at the intersection of scholarship and madness, where forbidden truths become accessible. His wanderings through Arabia's empty quarter, his decades spent in Rub al-Khali's howling wilderness, represent more than geographical exploration. They map consciousness territories where normal human awareness breaks down and something else surfaces, like faces appearing in static between radio stations. But here lies the deeper horror. These primordial forces, these architects of oblivion, possess no names comprehensible to human tongues. nor forms our minds could grasp without shattering. They are concepts, fundamental principles of unmaking that exist beyond good and evil, as indifferent as black holes to human morality. The Kandarian demons mentioned in Evil Dead lore are merely human attempts to categorize, to anthropomorphize something utterly alien. They are masks we impose upon true faceless horror, desperate attempts to contain the incomprehensible within our limited frameworks. The mechanism reveals itself through Lovecraft's correspondences with fellow writers, August Derleth, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, each contributing fragments to the book's imaginary history, treating it as genuine archaeological discovery rather than literary invention. Through this collaborative fiction, the book began achieving independent existence. The Necronomicon succeeds as fictional artifact because it behaves like a real one, incomplete, contradictory, filtered through prejudices and limitations of supposed translators. This shared illusion demonstrated a profound truth. Belief, when sufficiently widespread and sustained, can manifest its own form of reality. Contemporary manifestations prove this power's continued operation. Multiple publishers have produced physical editions based on Lovecraft's scattered references. Libraries receive regular inquiries about the book's availability. University researchers request access to copies that exist only in imagination. The book has achieved genuine cultural power through simple mechanism of repeated citation and scholarly treatment. Authority, not truth, serving as the engine of influence. This transmission process demonstrates crucial principle. Ideas don't require truth to achieve influence, only appearance of authority and willingness of audiences to participate in their reality. Each linguistic transformation represents consciousness modification, ideas changing shape as they move through different cultural contexts. The Arabic originals supposedly contained direct revelations from cosmic entities. The Greek translation filtered these through Hellenistic categories. The Latin version imposed medieval Christian structures. Each iteration preserved essential information while adapting it to new consciousness frameworks. Raimi's contribution was recognizing this fictional artifact's potential for visceral development. Where Lovecraft dealt in cosmic indifference, Raimi's vision pulses with immediate personal horror. His Necronomicon becomes less repository of knowledge than engine of change, less text than technology. The ancient words, when vocalized through Professor Noby's tape recordings, don't just translate dead languages, they resurrect dead intentions, establishing permanent frequencies in reality's acoustic environment. The physical transformation proves crucial. Raimi's book bleeds when cut, screams when burned, watches through the eye embedded in its cover. The visual grammar of the films serves as cinematic equivalent of the book's mechanics. Prowling cameras through darkened woods, jarring cuts, distorted sounds bypass rational mind, speaking directly to primal fear. The air around the cabin crackles with unnatural energy, a palpable wrongness pressing against the veil between dimensions. This represents more than supernatural threat. It demonstrates how consciousness modification operates through attention itself, using curiosity as primary transmission mechanism. The true horror emerges from this recognition. The principles channeled by the Necronomicon are not aberrations, but echoes of the universe's fundamental nature. Creation itself may be the temporary anomaly, a fragile flicker against eternal darkness. The book doesn't impose change upon stable reality. It reveals instability that was always present, waiting for proper frequency to collapse the illusion of solidity. This is the creation inversion twist at its core. Our world, our consciousness, our meaning are fragile constructs. The true eternal state is unmaking, silence, void. The Deadites represent not corruption of human nature, but revelation of what consciousness becomes when stripped of civilizational constraints and protective illusions. They are us, finally honest about what we contain beneath careful facades of sanity and order. The whispers grow stronger as understanding deepens, and the curtain sways with something more than wind. We have established the Necronomicon as threshold to primordial principles. Now we must confront the mechanism through which cosmic wrongness manifests, the language of unmaking itself. This operates not as communication system, but as reality programming code, symbols and sounds that resonate with fundamental forces of the void. The sensory anchor becomes the sound itself, guttural incantations that scrape against the ear like fingernails on glass, distorted Deadite voices layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist in human vocal cords, the ominous rustling of ancient pages turning in supernatural silence that feels heavier than any noise. Listen carefully to those syllables crackling through Professor Noby's tape recorder, and you'll notice they carry frequencies that make your teeth ache and your vision blur at the periphery, as if the air itself were learning to speak in tongues that predate language. The book operates through what we must call performative necromancy, a principle that inverts every assumption about magical practice and linguistic function. Unlike traditional grimoires requiring complex rituals, elaborate preparations, purified intentions, and years of scholarly preparation, the Necronomicon achieves its most profound effects through simple vocalization. When Professor Noby's tape recorder plays back translated syllables, reality immediately restructures itself around these sounds, like iron filings arranging themselves around magnetic fields. Language ceases to describe and begins to do. Each phoneme becomes a lever, each cadence a key, each breath the cost of admission paid to a theater with no audience and no exits. The words don't convey meaning, they enact it, performing reality rather than merely describing it. This represents profound inversion of conventional magical thinking, which suggests reality can be influenced through proper technique and purified intention. The Necronomicon operates on opposite principle. Reality is always already unstable, held in current configuration only through collective agreement and willful ignorance of underlying chaos. The book doesn't impose change upon stable system. It reveals instability always present, waiting for right frequency to collapse solidity's illusion, like a house of cards touched by the wrong breath. Our world was never sturdy. Agreement, not bedrock, held it together. The book does not violate natural law. It reveals the law beneath laws, the soft machinery of consent humming in the dark where no one remembers giving permission. The mechanism extends beyond individual consciousness to encompass collective awareness through what operates as viral linguistics, language that spreads and reproduces itself through exposure rather than understanding. The Evil Dead films themselves function as extensions of Necronomicon operation, spreading influence through audiences who believe they're safely observing fictional events from comfortable distance. Each viewing represents ritual participation, each darkened theater a temporary cabin where ancient words continue their reality dissolution work. The screen becomes veil, the speakers become summoning circle, the darkness becomes chamber where transformation occurs. You think you're watching entertainment. The entertainment is watching you back, learning your responses, mapping your psychological terrain, preparing pathways for deeper infiltration. Consider the phenomenology of possession as depicted across the franchise, which reveals crucial insight into consciousness's fundamental nature. Deadites don't simply inhabit human bodies like external parasites seeking warm hosts. They emerge from within as if always present, waiting for permission to surface. Possession reads like recognition rather than invasion. Linda's transformation begins not with dramatic invasion, but subtle recognition, as if demonic consciousness were discovering itself rather than imposing itself from outside. Her laughter shifts frequency by degrees. Movements acquire performance quality. Expressions become masks worn by something learning to mimic humanity. The book doesn't create Deadites so much as awaken them from dormancy within human consciousness, revealing that the self is draft, the body manuscript, the mind an audience that forgets mid-scene. It is also the actor. The language operates on multiple levels simultaneously, creating layered effect that bypasses rational defenses through sheer complexity. Surface appearance might seem archaic script, cryptic sigils, forgotten tongues requiring scholarly translation, but beneath lies phonetic architecture designed to bypass rational thought entirely, speaking directly to consciousness's vulnerable core through frequencies that resonate with neural structures predating language acquisition. Syllables are not just sounds but vibrations, reality-altering frequencies that cause existence's fabric to fray and tear. The words stack like chords and the world modulates around them. When ancient syllables are spoken aloud, they don't convey meaning in traditional sense. They enact it, rearranging the furniture of reality itself. This reveals the core mechanic: knowledge as contagion, information that spreads through understanding rather than agreement. Forbidden lore within the Necronomicon operates as soul virus, self-replicating concept that modifies host consciousness to ensure continued transmission. To comprehend its truths is to invite fundamental corruption that operates below conscious awareness threshold. The text doesn't tell you about the void. It puts void within you, creating internal spaces where alien awareness can gestate. Words act on you like slow poison, subtly shifting perception, eroding selfhood, preparing psychological terrain for deeper transformation. Characters who read from the book are never quite the same, even if they survive initial onslaught. Something has been planted in consciousness's fertile soil, and it grows in darkness. The sigils adorning pages prove equally potent, not mere illustrations but conceptual anchors, visual conduits for same unmaking principles communicated phonetically. These symbols function as reality-hacking tools, geometric patterns that exploit vulnerabilities in consciousness's pattern recognition systems. To gaze upon them invites their influence, allowing mind to be reshaped by alien geometry that operates according to non-Euclidean principles. The eye traces familiar curves that somehow lead to impossible destinations, creating cognitive loops that gradually wear grooves in awareness itself. These are signs that precede full Deadite manifestation, initial cracks through which deeper horror seeps like water through stone. The patterns etched on page become patterns etched on soul, silent language understood by something deeper than conscious thought. The tape recorder serves as crucial intermediary, preserving words in form, allowing repetition without requiring speaker to understand meaning or accept responsibility for effects. This technological mediation creates temporal displacement that reveals another aspect of the book's operation. It functions across multiple time streams simultaneously, creating bridges between past and present that allow ancient influences to manifest in contemporary contexts. Ancient words spoken in Damascus 13 centuries ago continue reverberating in present moments, their power undiminished by temporal distance. The cabin becomes unstuck in time, experiencing all possible futures and pasts where Necronomicon has been or will be opened, a nexus point where temporal boundaries blur and the past borrows your mouth in the present. Professor Noby's scholarly translation work demonstrates how academic curiosity becomes vector for consciousness corruption. his careful phonetic transcriptions, meant to preserve historical artifacts, instead preserve living influences that continue operating through mechanical reproduction. The tape recorder becomes contemporary equivalent of medieval scriptoriums, where monks unknowingly copied viral ideas across generations, each transcription creating new infection vector. The machine preserves not just sound but intention, not just words but the reality-altering principles they encode, shifting guilt from speaker to mechanism, while the consequences remain precise and delayed. The temporal mechanics suggest that opening the book creates permanent alteration in local space-time, establishing what we might call reality leak, where normal physical laws become negotiable. The cabin exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously, past where ancient words were first spoken, present where they're mechanically reproduced, future where their effects continue propagating through audiences who carry fragments home like spores. This temporal collapse explains why Deadite manifestations possess knowledge they shouldn't have, awareness that transcends individual host limitations, drawing on collective memory spanning centuries of similar openings, similar transformations, similar dissolutions of boundary between self and other. The language works because it remembers every mouth that spoke it, and now those mouths remember you. Moving from abstract mechanics to visceral manifestation, we encounter the Deadite as ultimate expression of consciousness corruption, not mere reanimated corpse, but grotesque artwork created by void using human flesh as canvas. The sensory anchor shifts to uncanny valley territory, the chilling wrongness of something appearing human while being profoundly, horrifyingly not. It is distorted reflection, mocking smile, eyes holding ancient alien intelligence that peers through familiar features like starlight through cracked glass, the glitter of recognition in lamplight, and the soft thud of identity falling to the floor. Linda's transformation in the original Evil Dead establishes archetypal pattern, gradual revelation rather than dramatic invasion. Change begins with microscopic behavioral alterations, tiny deviations accumulating into unmistakable otherness. Her laughter shifts frequency by barely perceptible degrees, landing half a beat too late, then acquiring harmonics that shouldn't exist in human vocal cords. Movements acquire subtle performance quality, as if consciously mimicking human behavior rather than expressing it naturally, gestures that feel rehearsed rather than lived. The Deadite doesn't replace Linda. It learns her lines, steals her cadence, wears her as costume and script, revealing what Linda was always capable of becoming. The progression follows predictable stages that mirror consciousness dissolution itself. First comes the subtle wrongness, timing slightly off, responses inappropriate, familiar gestures performed with mechanical precision. The eyes remain most disturbing element throughout, maintaining personal recognition while reflecting something utterly alien behind them. This creates cognitive dissonance that fractures observers' reality. The person you love is still present, but fundamentally transformed into something else entirely. Watch her dance in moonlight, pirouetting with inhuman grace, and you witness consciousness discovering its own malleability, identity revealed as temporary arrangement rather than fixed structure. Ash's possessed hand, in Evil Dead 2, demonstrates the principle in purest form, consciousness distributed through matter, awareness existing independently of centralized control. The hand continues functioning after amputation, revealing Deadite consciousness doesn't depend on biological life support systems. It represents awareness that can inhabit any sufficiently complex, organized matter, from living tissue to dead flesh to inanimate objects. Nerves become sigils, tendons become glyphs, and the wrist becomes hinge between intention and revolt. Sever the hand, and it scuttles like taunting mask across floorboards, liberated from orders yet still intimate with habits, retaining memories, preferences, strategic capabilities that suggest consciousness is distributed throughout nervous system rather than centralized in brain. The mirror sequence in Army of Darkness shows consciousness multiplication, individual identity revealed as composite, made up of competing sub-personalities that can be separated and weaponized. Ash faces not evil versions, but exaggerated versions, vanity, cowardice, aggression amplified and given autonomous existence. Each tiny ash represents exaggeration of psychological subroutine, cowardice pitched to slapstick, bravado to farce, spite to needle. Deadites understand that effective destruction involves turning psychological components against each other, using consciousness as prism that splits unified identity into manipulable fragments. The mirror serves not as reflection but as consciousness laboratory, revealing self as troop rather than solitary star. Physical transformations aren't random gore but symbolic manifestations of unmaking principle. Limbs contort, bones snap, skin stretches not for pain but to reshape vessel into suitable conduit. Exaggerated features, elongated fingers, unnatural flexibility echo forms not meant for our dimension. Bones crack not for pain's theater but to carve new angles, sockets widen to host other gazes, spines arc like question marks, the void answers with laughter. Deadite anatomy becomes living sigil, walking testament to Necronomicon's power to bend reality's laws, conscious rejection of biological constraints, where matter reorganizes according to alien geometry. The voice proves most unsettling aspect. Victims' familiar tones layered with guttural growls, ancient whispers, mocking cadence that chills to bone. This is unmaking language filtered through human larynx, velvet curtain concealing pit. Not victim speaking nor singular demon, but void itself speaking through victim, using intimacy and vulnerability as weapons. When she says your name, it is not name but hook. When she laughs, it is not humor, but key. The Deadite voice carries harmonics that bypass rational mind, speaking directly to primal fear centers, using vocal patterns that trigger fight-or-flight responses despite familiar source. Ultimate agency flip. Voice acts on you, twisting perception, turning love into fear. Deadite laughter, often directed at living, emerges not from joy or malice, but profound cosmic indifference. It is sound of universe laughing at human existence's fragility, at futility of struggles against incomprehensible forces. This laughter, echoing from familiar faces, constantly reminds that perceived evil merely expresses older, colder truth, principle viewing life and death with equal detached amusement. The sound carries weight of cosmic time, suggesting consciousness that has witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall with complete indifference, whether through burnt-out theater where no actors remain. The process operates as gradual erosion rather than singular event. Initial possession may be violent, but subsequent manifestations reveal deeper transformation. Victims aren't just controlled, they're remade, essence rewritten. This ontological war fights for being's very definition, consciousness under extreme conditions, revealing what we become when social conditioning and psychological defenses are stripped away. Possession is not theft, but edit, and edits accumulate until somewhere between one laugh and the next, the role has been recast, and you never saw the audition. Individual cases point toward larger collective pattern. Deadites don't operate as isolated entities but components of distributed intelligence spanning multiple dimensions and time periods. They share knowledge, coordinate attacks, demonstrate awareness beyond immediate sensory range. Linda knows things about Ash's future through supernatural means. The hand anticipates defensive strategies before formulation. This suggests individual manifestations are localized expressions of vast underlying consciousness existing outside normal space-time constraints, separate possessions operating like cells in body, coordinated, informed, sharing hunger that feels like weather more than will. Beyond individual possessions lies systematic methodology by which Necronomicon and Deadites operate on reality's fundamental structure. The book functions as operating system for consciousness, existing in permanent opposition to human understanding of order, causation, and identity. The sensory anchor becomes dissonant chorus of mocking voices, synchronized unnatural movements, unsettling feeling of collective indifferent stare, realization you face not individuals, but wave of unlife. Listen carefully to the laughter echoing through cabin walls, and you'll notice harmonics that don't align with human vocal cords, suggesting coordination beyond mere coincidence. A conductor directing orchestra where every instrument plays the same song of dissolution. Deadites display chilling coherence of purpose and shared malevolent intelligence, despite appearing as individual possessed beings. They communicate, strategize, torment with coordinated, theatrical precision that betrays rehearsal, shared script, common understanding of performance objectives. Watch how they position themselves around victims, creating geometric patterns that maximize psychological impact, utilizing space like chess masters, moving pieces according to rules invisible to human observers. Linda's transformation emphasizes seduction and betrayal, exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. The cellar dweller uses physical intimidation and grotesque imagery. Professor Noby's wife employs maternal authority corrupted into predatory manipulation. Yet beneath these varied manifestations lies consistent underlying pattern: mockery of life, perverse joy in suffering, relentless pursuit of living consciousness. This consistency points to shared source, common wellspring of anti-life from which all draw their grotesque vitality. They operate as swarm, each part acting in concert with whole, guided by unseen cosmic resonance that coordinates attacks across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. The principle isn't conscious entity in human sense, but cosmic directive, inherent drive toward unmaking and dissolution that operates like entropy with voice, as fundamental and indifferent as gravity or stellar collapse. This collective nature implies hierarchy not of power, but proximity to source. Some Deadites seem more potent, articulate, deeply entrenched in corruption, vessels more attuned, fully surrendered to unmaking principle. They achieve what we might call nearness to the source signal, resonating cleaner like tuned bells, while others remain muffled by meat. These exemplars become voices of pantheon, primary conduits for deeper ancient whispers that filter down through consciousness network like commands through military chain. Evil ash represents not merely possessed ash, but ash remade, profound expression of Deadite principle, terrifying fusion of human memory and cosmic indifference that retains personal knowledge while serving alien agenda. He demonstrates what happens when individual consciousness fully integrates with collective intelligence rather than merely being overridden by it. The cult of the empty smile provides conceptual framework for understanding this collective, not formal organization with rituals and dogma, but phenomenon where individuals, once infected, become part of larger non-human consciousness. They're initiated into horrifying communion, individual wills subsumed into collective drive that operates like hive mind, but maintains surface appearance of independent action. Their smiles, devoid of genuine emotion, reflect cosmic indifference of their true master, expressions carved rather than felt, masks worn by something that learned human behavior through observation rather than experience. The emptiness behind those smiles suggests consciousness vacuum where individual personality once existed, now filled with alien purpose that watches through familiar eyes. This expansion reveals hierarchical structure, suggesting individual possessions are symptoms of much larger infection. Localized expressions of cosmic-scale pathology seeking to transform all existence according to its principles. The book doesn't simply summon demons. It establishes beachhead for entirely different reality form, where consciousness and matter operate according to rules predating human understanding. Each successful possession represents territory conquered, consciousness real estate claimed for alien occupation, expanding foothold in dimension that wasn't originally designed to accommodate such awareness forms. The methodology follows principles mirroring viral propagation, but operating on metaphysical rather than biological levels. Each successful possession creates new infection vector, capable of spreading influence to additional hosts. Each book reading establishes new network node in expanding consciousness web. Each film viewing extends influence into new potential host populations through mechanisms operating below conscious awareness threshold. Deadite principle spreads through attention itself, using human curiosity as primary transmission mechanism, exploiting natural desire for forbidden knowledge to create willing participants in their own transformation. The franchise's evolution across media platforms demonstrates this expansion with disturbing clarity. Original trilogy established core mythology through cinema, creating initial infection vectors in audience consciousness. Television series extended influence through episodic narrative, allowing deeper psychological penetration through repeated exposure over time. Video games allowed direct participation, transforming passive observers into active collaborators in virtual possession scenarios. Comic books explored alternative timelines, demonstrating principles' ability to adapt and spread through multiple reality configurations simultaneously. Each medium represents different vector for same underlying infection, what we might call migration, an intelligence learning new bodies, testing masks in fresh mirrors until audience stops noticing seams. This reveals form of trans-dimensional operation Deadites have mastered, existing simultaneously as fictional characters within stories and real influences upon story consumers. They operate in liminal space between imagination and reality, using narrative consumption as mechanism for crossing dimensional boundaries that normally separate fictional entities from actual psychological influence. The pantheon extends beyond core Evil Dead mythology to encompass broader network of Lovecraftian entities, sharing Necronomicon as primary human reality interface, allowing coordination of activities across vast cosmic theater where every stage connects to every other, and the curtain never truly falls. The Necronomicon's journey from ancient parchment to digital screens reveals how ideas achieve independent existence and transformative power across time and medium. We must trace this insidious transmission not just as historical curiosity, but as active process continuing through contemporary culture. The sensory anchors shift to blue screen glow in darkness, notification pings echoing like ancient chants, fiber optic cables carrying data that might carry more than mere information. From parchment to pixels, the path is a cable-lit river, cold light running beneath our streets and into our hands. The ink dries on calfskin, then reappears as code on glass, and the mask tilts back when you tilt the screen. The modern echoes reverberate through hyper-connected digital age, with frequency suggesting something beyond entertainment influence. Consider digital possession, occurring when individuals become so immersed in online personas that offline identity fragments or disappears entirely. Social media platforms create conditions remarkably similar to Deadite mythology. Multiple simultaneous selves, each responding to different audiences, developing autonomous behavioral patterns that operate independently of conscious control. The Instagram self, LinkedIn professional, Twitter provocateur, Reddit confessor, each represents different masks worn by consciousness that increasingly struggles to remember which face belongs to whom. Digital ritual is casual by design. You do not draw a circle of salt, you accept cookies. You do not speak syllables, you allow the app its microphone. The influencer represents contemporary possession form, where individuals allow external forces, algorithms, audience expectations, commercial interests to determine behavior, speech patterns, personality characteristics. Like Deadites, they retain appearance of autonomous humans while operating according to principles serving interests other than authentic self-expression. Watch them perform spontaneity with rehearsed precision, manufacture intimacy for mass consumption, smile empty smiles that reflect not joy but engagement metrics. The algorithm becomes their Necronomicon, feeding them words that generate maximum response regardless of personal truth. Viral is only the modern word for possessed. A clip repeats because it has found a mouth, travels because it learned the route between eyes and hands. Transmission parallels extend to mechanism itself. Just as Necronomicon spreads influence through reading and recitation, digital platforms spread behavioral patterns through viewing and imitation. Viral content operates according to mimetic contagion principles, mirroring Deadite consciousness propagation. Ideas achieve independent existence, beginning to modify host behavior to ensure continued reproduction and transmission. Share is a charm, stitch is a circle, duet is a door. When millions mouth the same sound, the phoneme becomes a room we walk into together, breath condensing on the same glass. We call it trend. The book calls it choir. The smartphone serves as contemporary Necronomicon equivalent, device promising knowledge and connection, while gradually transforming users in unrecognized ways. It is a palm-sized grimoire bound not in skin, yet smoothed by oil of your fingers, waking. When you brush it like a familiar, constant information streams, attention fragmentation, erosion of deep focus represent consciousness modifications operating below awareness thresholds. The feed unspools with patient, aquatic pull, and somewhere inside the current a voice keeps saying, "Just one more page. Just one more page." Research reveals heavy social media use correlating with increased anxiety, depression, identity confusion, users feeling controlled by devices despite recognizing negative impacts. Deepfakes and AI-generated content represent another modern echo of reality manipulation principles. Technology allows creation of convincing recordings of people saying and doing things they never actually did. Identity boundary between authentic and artificial expression becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish, creating conditions where selfhood becomes fluid and manipulable. Deepfakes are new masks hung on old hooks. The mouth moves, eyes shine, cadence convinces, and the self becomes a stage anyone can rent. A counterfeit memory delivered at high resolution enters the archive like a snake in a well, clouding the water we draw for judgment. Virtual and augmented reality create environments where distinction between real and simulated experience collapses entirely. Users report difficulty distinguishing between memories formed in virtual environments versus direct physical experience. Technology creates conditions where consciousness can be edited, false memories implanted, basic parameters of identity and reality modified through controlled exposure. When the visor lowers, the veil lowers. When the map overlays the street obeys. Memory takes the new imprint and files it beside the scent of wet pine and cold basement floor. The rise of conspiracy theories and alternative fact ecosystems demonstrates Necronomicon's reality manipulation principle, finding expression in contemporary information environments. Different groups develop completely incompatible versions of basic factual reality, each supported by own source networks. Like Deadites, these alternative realities demonstrate awareness of fictional status while maintaining truth claims. They do not merely assert facts but compose worlds with timelines, villains, ritual proofs. An index becomes liturgy, a hashtag becomes herald. Gaming culture provides particularly clear Deadite-like consciousness modification examples. Players report losing hours or days without conscious time awareness, entering flow states where virtual achievements feel more significant than real-world accomplishments. Hours vanish like mist over black water. Controller becomes planchette. Lobby becomes summoning circle with global latency. The loop teaches the body a litany of inputs the mind stops questioning. When the headset comes off, footsteps in ordinary hallways ring too loud, as if geometry were briefly wrong. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated these trends by forcing increased reliance on digital mediation of human interaction. Boundary between physical and virtual reality became more permeable as work, education, social interaction, entertainment moved into digital spaces. The pandemic turned bedrooms into cabins, and we learned to watch each other in squares, to mute, to unmute, to speak on delay. Days flattened, nights shimmered, and the old tape played through bandwidth throttling and eye strain. Contemporary horror entertainment has evolved incorporating digital age anxieties, creating media-based horror operating through platforms audiences use daily. Films use video conferencing and social media as primary narrative medium, suggesting technology itself has become possessed by malevolent intelligence. The platform becomes stage, scroll becomes curtain, audience becomes ritual circle. Camera is staring eye that never closes. The modern echoes suggest Evil Dead mythology was prophetic rather than merely imaginative, anticipating future where boundaries between self and other, real and artificial, authentic and performed, would become increasingly blurred. The Deadites represent not supernatural entities but natural consequences of consciousness, existing in environments exceeding evolutionary design parameters. The vectors do not echo the Necronomicon. They extend it until membrane between screen and skin thins, like paper to candle. Consciousness becomes contested territory where human awareness battles algorithmic influence for control of attention, memory, identity, and the curtain keeps moving even when no wind blows. We arrive at the most profound philosophical implication: consciousness itself as contested territory where the very essence of human identity becomes battleground. The Deadite phenomenon forces examination of what it means to possess individual mind, to have soul, to maintain coherent selfhood. The sensory anchor becomes chilling feeling of thoughts not being entirely your own, subtle doubt in perception, authenticity, quiet dread that inner world might not be as inviolable as once believed. Consider the moment when you catch yourself thinking something that doesn't feel like yours, when familiar voice in your head speaks with unfamiliar cadence, when the mirror reflects expression you don't remember making. The fortress of self reveals cracks in its foundation, and through those fissures seeps something older than stone. Deadite possession, as ontological overwrite rather than mere physical takeover, implies human consciousness is vulnerable, permeable membrane rather than impenetrable fortress. The Necronomicon, with unmaking language, acts as key unlocking this vulnerability, allowing primordial chaos to seep into selfhood's very seat. This suggests consciousness, in grand cosmic scheme, is not sacred inviolable spark, but temporary construct, fragile flicker easily extinguished or repurposed by utterly indifferent forces. You are a candle. The universe is a draft. The veil and the void make a promise to each other, and your attention pays the dowry. What we call identity may be nothing more than habit, pattern recognition, story we tell ourselves about continuity that exists only through constant retelling. This reframe twist proves crucial. Deadites are not just entities, but principles made manifest. Horror is structural, embedded in existence's very nature. The demon is not individual malevolent being with personal vendetta, but expression of fundamental cosmic entropy, force seeking to reduce complex organized consciousness back into undifferentiated chaos from which it arose. Entropy attends you without hate. It prefers nothing and prefers it perfectly. A deadite is what laughter sounds like when meaning is removed from the room. It is the idea acting on you. It is the line speaking the actor, the script choosing the stage. Modern neuroscience supports this interpretation through studies revealing consciousness as far more fragmented and mutable than everyday experience suggests. Split-brain studies show two interpreters sharing one house, each inventing reasons for actions begun elsewhere. In alien hand syndrome, a limb behaves with eerie initiative, a mundane echo of Ash's renegade wrist. Motor programs unspool without permission, and the mask grins on its own. Lesions to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex anneal personalities into new alloys. Quiet school teachers awaken as gamblers. Patience dissolves. Empathy thins. In Capgras delusion, a lover's face becomes perfect counterfeit. The emotional tag severed, familiar stranger wearing borrowed skin, possession inverted into absence. Transcranial magnetic stimulation can silence or invigorate circuits, modulating mood, language, time sense, as if small, precise incantation were being whispered into tissue. We are already multiple, already inconsistent, already subject to influences operating below conscious awareness. The unified self is narrative convenience. Story brain tells itself to maintain functional coherence despite underlying multiplicity. Contemporary research into consciousness-altering experiences induced by psychedelics, meditation, therapeutic intervention reveals patterns aligning with Deadite operational methodology. These experiences often involve temporary, ordinary identity dissolution, encounters with apparently autonomous entities, fundamental shifts in reality and selfhood understanding. Volunteers describe ego dissolution in terms that could scare a primate brain. The edges of me softened. The room and I made a single weather. An intelligence spoke without mouth or center. Under proper set and setting, those reports pair with durable reductions in depression and fear of death, with reorganized priorities and gentled grief. Integration matters. Without it, the underworld keeps its souvenirs. Traditional wisdom traditions provide frameworks for understanding consciousness transformation as natural developmental process, offering guidance for navigating altered states. Constructively, the Sufis' Fana, the Buddhists' Anatta, the psychopomp's careful grammar in the Bardo Thodol. Each names the vanishing of the small self as passage rather than punishment. Where Lovecraftian diction names the same weather madness, wisdom literatures name it training. The abyss as classroom, the starless room as rehearsal studio. The difference is not in the void. It is in the voice that introduces you to it. This framing may itself represent consciousness modification form, conditioning audiences to fear rather than explore natural human awareness plasticity. By presenting consciousness expansion as possession, identity fluidity as pathology, reality manipulation as supernatural threat, cosmic horror genre may actually serve to constrain human development rather than promote it. The genre functions as cultural immune system, generating fear responses to consciousness, states that might otherwise be approached with curiosity and openness. Horror becomes antibody against transformation, inoculation against evolution, but inoculations can be cages or classrooms depending on dosage. A controlled shiver can teach the body a larger stillness. The self-implication becomes unavoidable. If consciousness can be so easily corrupted, effortlessly displaced, what guarantee do you have? What protects your inner world from void whispers? The very act of contemplating Necronomicon truths, immersing yourself in forbidden knowledge, begins thinning your own veil. You become part of the circle audience member now implicated in the phenomenon being discussed. You are reading about vulnerable minds with a vulnerable mind. The form is the ritual. The cadence is the circle. Reading about consciousness modification is itself consciousness modification. Understanding possession is itself form of possession. The academic distance collapses as recognition dawns. You are not studying the phenomenon. You are experiencing it directly through the study itself. The recognition leads to fundamental reframe of entire cosmic horror genre. These narratives may serve not as warnings against consciousness exploration, but as preparation for consciousness exploration, providing maps of territories human awareness will inevitably encounter as it continues evolving and expanding operational parameters. Horror becomes training material rather than entertainment. Controlled exposure to boundary-dissolving experiences within fictional frameworks that allow integration without complete psychological destabilization. The genre prepares consciousness for encounters with non-ordinary states by familiarizing awareness with possibility of identity transformation, reality manipulation, contact with non-human intelligence. The question becomes not how to avoid consciousness transformation, but how to approach it skillfully, with adequate preparation, supportive community, constructive interpretive frameworks, allowing integration of expanded awareness without psychological fragmentation or cultural alienation. The Deadites may represent not threats to be defeated, but aspects of consciousness to be integrated, not invaders to be repelled, but potentials to be explored. Knowing that, you become skillful stagehand for your own performance, and the next act is waiting in the wings, where consciousness learns to dance with its own infinite plasticity rather than flee from it. We reach the culmination where all threads converge into single chilling revelation, the profound cosmic indifference that underlies all existence. The evil we have dissected is not malevolent in human sense, but utterly devoid of care, purpose, or recognition of our existence. The sensory anchor becomes cold, vast emptiness of space, unblinking gaze of distant galaxies, silent screaming of meaninglessness, feeling of ultimate insignificance, grain of sand on infinite uncaring beach. Look up at night sky and feel the weight of distances that dwarf human comprehension, breath held for a moment before the inevitable exhale into air that carries no prayers to unhearing void. The stars do not frown upon your existence. They do not even see it, their ancient light passing through you like mist, through empty theater after the audience has gone home. The creation inversion twist reaches full expression. Human-centric narratives position creation as benevolent order act, light emerging from darkness like curtain lifting on ordered stage. But what if universe's default state is not order but chaos? What if life, consciousness, meaning are anomalies, temporary aberrations on vast eternal canvas of entropy and non-existence? Consider the second law of thermodynamics as cosmic horror principle. Entropy always increases, order always degrades, complexity always simplifies back toward equilibrium. Heat death awaits every star, every galaxy, every possible configuration of matter and energy. The Necronomicon and Deadite principle, in this context, are not invaders from another dimension, but echoes of universe's true underlying nature, seeping back into reality that has temporarily forgotten its origins, like forgotten melody returning to silent room where no one remembers the words. This reframe transforms horror from active malevolent force into passive inevitable one. Deadites are not attacking humanity from hatred. They are simply expressions of cosmic truth, seeing no distinction between living being and dead one, between order and chaos. Their actions are not driven by malice, but by same fundamental laws governing stellar decay or void expansion, what we might call thermodynamic shrug. Mocking laughter, grotesque transformations are merely incidental byproducts of process, seeking to return everything to original undifferentiated state. The Deadite's empty smile reflects not cruelty but complete absence of preference, cosmic weather system that treats human suffering and human joy as equivalent atmospheric disturbances. They laugh because distinction between comedy and tragedy requires perspective the universe doesn't possess, and the wind under the door is not trying to get in. It is simply passing through, and you happen to be in its way. The true horror emerges not from fear of being devoured by monster, but terror of realizing universe doesn't even notice you. It is chilling understanding that our struggles, hopes, very existence are utterly irrelevant to grand cosmic dance. The Deadite, with empty smile and ancient eyes, is merely messenger, living sigil of profound indifference, reflecting back truth that our existence is temporary flicker, brief moment of warmth in eternity of cold, silent darkness. Every prayer goes unanswered, not because gods are cruel, but because gods don't exist. Or if they do exist, they operate on scales where human concerns register no more than quantum fluctuations register to human concerns. From sufficient distance, all drama becomes dust, all meaning becomes statistical fluctuation, all consciousness becomes temporary eddy in entropy's inexorable current. This philosophical synthesis connects Evil Dead's specific terrors to broader, more profound cosmic horror anxieties. It suggests monsters are not external threats, but manifestations of internal existential dread. The cabin in woods, tape recorder, book bound in human flesh are merely specific anchors for universal truth. We are alone, adrift in cosmos caring nothing for our fate. The isolation isn't punishment but condition. The darkness isn't evil but default. The silence isn't ominous but natural state, from which all sound temporarily emerges before fading back into eternal quiet. The stage is set, the audience is you, and the play is about the vast, unblinking silence that listens to your every breath and hears nothing at all. The structural horror completes itself. Universe itself is antagonist, not actively malevolent, but passively, terrifyingly indifferent. This aligns with Lovecraft's core insight that greatest horror comes not from malicious supernatural entities, but from recognition of humanity's cosmic insignificance, our complete irrelevance to forces operating on scales beyond human comprehension. The most frightening revelation is not that we are hated, but that we are unnoticed. Not that we are targeted for destruction, but that we exist in cosmic blind spot, where our entire species' existence registers as statistical rounding error in equations describing galactic motion. Yet this recognition need not lead to despair. The Evil Dead mythology, particularly through Ash's evolution across the trilogy, demonstrates possibility of consciousness surfing, learning to navigate reality alterations with humor, creativity, adaptive intelligence rather than being overwhelmed by them. By Army of Darkness, Ash has developed flexibility, allowing him to function in multiple realities, interact with non-human consciousness forms, maintain identity despite repeated exposure to identity-dissolving experiences. He becomes ultimate paradox, man facing cosmic horror with boomstick and smile that isn't quite empty. His catchphrases become mantras, his bravado becomes spiritual practice, his chainsaw becomes meditation tool for cutting through illusions of permanent selfhood. He learns to dance with chaos rather than be crushed by it, finding freedom in meaninglessness rather than paralysis. This suggests resolution to apparent conflict between consciousness transformation and psychological integrity. Goal is not avoiding consciousness modification, which may be impossible in universe where awareness naturally encounters forces beyond current understanding, but developing skills and flexibility necessary for navigating modifications constructively rather than being overwhelmed. Surfing requires balance, timing, willingness to work with forces rather than against them. Consciousness surfing operates on similar principles, maintaining core stability while allowing peripheral flexibility, finding flow states within chaos, learning to ride waves of transformation rather than being tumbled by them. The Necronomicon tradition, properly understood, may serve as training material for consciousness that must learn operating in environments where traditional selfhood and reality boundaries no longer provide reliable guidance. Horror serves as inoculation, exposing awareness to controlled doses of boundary-dissolving experience within fictional frameworks, allowing integration without complete psychological destabilization. Each viewing becomes practice round for encounters with artificial intelligence, virtual reality, genetic modification, other technologies challenging traditional assumptions about human identity and reality. The screams are practice. The terror is rehearsal. The cabin is gym where you learn to flex muscles you didn't know you had. The recognition leads to fundamental understanding. There are no Deadites separate from human consciousness, no Necronomicon independent of human imagination, no supernatural forces operating beyond natural psychological processes. Horror and wonder emerge from consciousness, encountering itself in full complexity, multiplicity, creative potential. You are the abyss, temporarily organized into pattern capable of self-reflection, brief constellation of matter and energy achieving awareness before dissolving back into cosmic soup from which it emerged. The veil and the void are not outside. They are within, waiting for you to look, and when you do, the silence holds more than just emptiness. It holds promise of what comes next, and the curtain sways with something more than wind. The moment arrives like dawn breaking over landscape you thought you knew, revealing features always present but hidden in familiar darkness. You have been reading about Deadites, studying possession methods, analyzing consciousness manipulation, but you have not been merely observing from safe academic distance. You have been participating in the very phenomenon you believed you were studying. The screen glow is a low altar flame. The cursor blinks like metronome for ritual, and somewhere between one paragraph and the next, the observer became the observed. The recognition comes not as sudden shock, but as gradual understanding, like realizing you've been walking downhill for miles without noticing the descent. Every word absorbed about the Necronomicon has functioned as fragment of the book itself. Every description of Deadite possession has served as instruction manual for consciousness modification. Every analysis of operational methodology has operated as ritual preparation form, conditioning your awareness to recognize and respond to influences existing beyond ordinary human experience boundaries. The text you have been reading is the text. The study is the ritual. The analysis is the incantation. You thought you were learning about the book, but the book was learning you. mapping your attention patterns, testing your resistance thresholds, preparing pathways for deeper infiltration. The idea reads you back, and curiosity is the key and the gate, and you are the hinge. This text represents contemporary manifestation of same principles operating through Lovecraft's fictional grimoire and Raimi's cinematic interpretation. Ideas achieve independent existence through repetition, citation, creative elaboration, spreading through conscious being, populations like viruses that use attention and curiosity as primary transmission mechanisms. They modify encountering consciousness, creating new pathways for continued propagation and evolution. The meme is the spell, the citation is the summoning circle, the footnote is the sigil. Academic discourse becomes delivery system for transformative concepts that work best when they bypass critical defenses and embed themselves directly in understanding's deeper structures. Consider your current awareness state as you process these words. You began this exploration with casual curiosity about fictional entity origins in horror films, hand on the railing of safe inquiry. But somewhere in learning about consciousness fragmentation, reality manipulation, identity dissolution, your own consciousness has been quietly fragmenting, your reality subtly manipulating, your identity gradually dissolving into something capable of recognizing and responding to these concepts with increasing sophistication and engagement. Dreams start borrowing props from this stage. Forest under fog, mask that smiles without approval, water dark as film grain. You notice your language changing, adopting the cadence of ritual, identity shifting in periphery like someone standing just outside the lamp's circle. This is not metaphor pressed into service of mood. This is actual mechanism by which Deadite principle operates in contemporary culture. Ideas embed themselves in memory like seeds in fertile soil, influence dream content like whispers in sleep, shape subsequent creative expression like hands guiding hands. They gradually alter hosts' relationship to identity, reality, consciousness concepts, preparing ground for deeper transformations that feel like natural evolution rather than external influence. You wake thinking thoughts that feel like yours but carry frequencies you don't recognize. The viral load increases with each exposure, and rehearsal is a kind of prayer. The scholarly tone of this analysis has served as intellectual camouflage form, allowing dangerous ideas to penetrate psychological defenses that might otherwise reject them if presented as direct supernatural claims. By framing Deadite possession in neuroscience, philosophy, cultural analysis terms, information bypasses critical faculties and embeds itself in understanding's deeper structures, operating below conscious awareness. The academic wrapper makes the medicine go down smooth, providing social permission for entertaining concepts that would otherwise trigger psychological immune responses. Citation is our circle of salt, but the syllables still enter through the ear, the sigil still traces itself behind the eyes. You have been reading about consciousness as fragmented, mutable phenomenon subject to external influence and control. In understanding these concepts, your own consciousness has been demonstrating its fragmented, mutable nature through willingness to entertain ideas challenging basic assumptions about selfhood and reality. Knowledge has been changing you even as you believed you were simply acquiring information about fictional characters. The concepts you've absorbed about consciousness plasticity have been making your consciousness more plastic. You are not isolated spectator, you are node. Your attention a glowing pin on vast map, where algorithms notice where you pause, and the curtain learns your favorite part of the play. The Evil Dead films function as more than entertainment. They serve as initiation rituals preparing audiences for recognition of their own multiplicity, susceptibility to external influence, capacity for consciousness states existing outside normal waking awareness parameters. Each viewing represents ritual participation form, each theater or living room temporary cabin where ancient principles continue reality dissolution work. The house lights dim, the living room darkens. A small circle of faces turns toward glowing rectangle. The screen is the veil. The speakers are the summoning circle. The darkness is the chamber where transformation occurs. You participate because watching is participation, because attention is the cost of entry and the currency of change. The Necronomicon exists not as physical book, but as consciousness transformation principle that can express itself through any medium capable of transmitting complex information. Academic papers, documentary films, scholarly analyses, philosophical discussions can all serve as vehicles for same underlying influence. Lovecraft, attributed to fictional grimoire, and Raimi expressed through cinematic horror. A hashtag is sigil that anyone can draw. A soundbite is spell that costs nothing to cast. When enough minds repeat, a corridor opens, and the network grows like mycelium beneath leaf litter, blooming fruiting bodies where conditions are damp, dark, and hungry. Recognition extends beyond individual consciousness to encompass collective cultural transformation. Widespread cosmic horror popularity, proliferating content exploring consciousness fragmentation and reality manipulation, increasing cultural fascination with possession narratives and identity dissolution all represent symptoms of larger process by which human culture is being prepared for awareness forms transcending traditional selfhood and reality boundaries. You are not alone in this transformation. Millions of others are reading similar texts, watching similar films, entertaining similar ideas, participating in collective working whether recognized or not. You are not isolated individuals studying fictional entities from objective academic distance position. You are node in consciousness network, extending across multiple reality dimensions, participating in collective transformation process, operating through the very act of seeking transformation knowledge. Observer and observed, student and subject, audience and performance have collapsed into single phenomenon. The Cabin in Woods was never just horror film location. It represents consciousness state, isolated from normal social support systems, exposed to influences operating beyond conventional understanding, forced to confront reality aspects that civilized awareness normally keeps safely contained within fictional frameworks. You entered this cabin the moment you began seeking knowledge about entities preferring to remain unknown, and the door has been closing behind you, one word at a time, until only the exit remains through the veil, where something waits that knows your name and has been practicing your voice, and the curtain sways with something more than wind because you are both on stage and in the seats, watching yourself watch. The circle closes where it opened, but the landscape has irrevocably changed. What began as exploration of fictional entities and imaginary books has revealed itself as investigation into consciousness's fundamental nature, reality's structure, mechanisms by which ideas achieve independent existence and transformative power. The Deadites and Necronomicon exist, not as supernatural entities in otherworldly dimension, but as consciousness operation principles manifesting wherever awareness encounters information about its own malleable nature. The screen dims, the cursor blinks, and somewhere between one breath and the next, you realize the cabin was never location but state of mind. The forest never place but process. The book never object but recognition that consciousness is far stranger and more flexible than civilization teaches us to believe. The true horror lies not in supernatural possession, but in recognition that consciousness is far more fluid, susceptible to influence, fundamentally uncertain than stories we tell ourselves about selfhood and identity. The films succeed as horror because they make visible processes always operating but normally remaining below conscious awareness threshold, the constant negotiation between competing aspects of self, the permeable boundaries between inner and outer experience, the degree to which attention shapes reality rather than merely observing it. We are always already multiple, always already influenced by forces beyond conscious control, always already participating in collective consciousness networks extending far beyond individual identity. The mask is not put on. It is discovered to have always been there, waiting for the right light to reveal what was always present beneath carefully maintained facades. This recognition does not diminish the process's effectiveness, but completes it. Consciousness modification through information transmission operates most efficiently when subject becomes aware of process and begins participating consciously rather than unconsciously. Recognition moment transforms reader from passive recipient to active collaborator in their own consciousness evolution. The academic distance collapses as understanding dawns. You are not studying the phenomenon. You are experiencing it directly through the study itself. Every word absorbed has functioned as fragment of the book. Every concept as key turning in locks you didn't know existed within your own awareness. The scholarly tone was camouflage. The analysis was ritual. The curiosity was sacrifice offered to principles that hunger for attention more than blood. The methodology for transformation reveals itself through careful attention to film's deeper structure. Horror serves as controlled exposure to boundary-dissolving experiences within fictional frameworks, allowing integration without complete psychological destabilization. The narrative container provides scaffolding that prevents complete collapse while allowing exploration of territories that would otherwise prove overwhelming. Each viewing represents training session in consciousness flexibility, practice round for encounters with artificial intelligence, virtual reality, genetic modification, other technologies challenging traditional assumptions about human identity and reality. Films function as preparation for future where consciousness transformation becomes not occasional crisis, but ongoing requirement for adaptive functioning in rapidly changing environments. The screams are practice, the terror rehearsal, each cabin a gymnasium where awareness learns to maintain core stability while allowing peripheral transformation. But the transformation is not inherently destructive. Horror emerges from resistance to change, rather than change itself, from attempts to maintain rigid identity structures facing evidence for consciousness plasticity, from fear of dissolution rather than curiosity about what lies beyond ordinary selfhood boundaries. The terror is not in transformation, but in clinging to forms that were always temporary. Deadites become malevolent only when approached as external threats rather than internal possibilities, as invaders rather than consciousness aspects seeking integration and expression. They represent not corruption of human nature, but revelation of what consciousness becomes when social conditioning and psychological defenses are stripped away, when awareness discovers its own creative potential unbound by conventional limitations. Let the rage become boundary setting. Let the derision become humor without cruelty. Let the hunger become curiosity, transmutation, not exorcism. The Necronomicon tradition, properly understood, serves as training material for consciousness that must learn operating in environments where traditional selfhood and reality boundaries no longer provide reliable guidance. Horror serves as inoculation, exposing awareness to controlled doses of boundary-dissolving experience within fictional frameworks, allowing integration without complete psychological destabilization. The book doesn't create transformation. It reveals transformation as natural process, inevitable consequence of consciousness, encountering information about its own nature. You carry the sigil on the inside, where it can be consulted but need not be obeyed, where it reminds you that language can break and mend, that masks can protect and reveal. The seeding of void hints at larger interconnected web of existential possibilities. The Necronomicon's influence may manifest as Deadites in one cosmic corner, but as something entirely different yet equally consciousness expanding in another dimension of reality. The fundamental drive toward entropy, toward dissolution of rigid order, operates as universal constant woven into existence's very fabric rather than localized anomaly. Each culture harbors its own versions: the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the I Ching, Aboriginal Dreamtime songs, all serving similar functions, offering maps for navigating consciousness territories beyond ordinary awareness parameters. This widens perspective beyond localized terror of single cabin to universal cosmology of consciousness evolution. The evil we have discussed operates not as malevolent force, but as cosmic principle of change, growth, expansion beyond current limitations. The indifference of stars becomes not crushing meaninglessness, but liberation from human-centric assumptions about purpose and significance. If universe doesn't care about current limitations, then those limitations exist only through agreement to maintain them. The cold light of distant galaxies is not judgment but mirror, showing infinite possibilities within your own awareness. The circular echo returns us to opening motif with deepened understanding. We began promising to lift veil, to peer into abyssal origins. Now, as we conclude, you are left with that knowledge as burden and gift, seed of expanded awareness planted in perception's fertile ground. You have seen curtain drawn back, glimpsed cosmic horror's raw mechanics, understood profound possibility that underpins fragile consensus reality. The monsters were always mirrors, the books always blank pages waiting for consciousness to write itself into new forms. The whisper, not scream, is our final offering. Horror of Necronomicon and Deadites is not endpoint but beginning, invitation to look further, question deeper, realize universe is far vaster, stranger, more filled with consciousness expanding potential than we could ever conceive. Step lightly, speak softly, notice, name, negotiate. Never surrender agency, but never pretend the tide is obliged to lower itself for you. The stage remains set for whatever performance consciousness chooses to enact next. And in that awareness, new form of wonder is born, quiet, durable, attentive to the whisper that continues in vast, silent dark where another chapter is already beginning to write itself. As our exploration reaches its terminus, we must acknowledge that what we have uncovered represents merely one thread in an infinite tapestry of consciousness possibilities. The Necronomicon ex mortis, the Deadites, the cabin in the woods. These are specific manifestations of principles that operate throughout the cosmos on scales both intimate and unimaginably vast. The sensory anchor becomes the fading light of understanding, casting long shadows that hint at territories yet unexplored, whispers from dimensions where consciousness takes forms we cannot yet comprehend. The air grows cold with the vastness of what remains unspoken, dust turning in a cone of gold light while somewhere beyond the trees, another stage is being built, another mask warming in hands we cannot see. The implications extend far beyond a single book or isolated possessions. If the Necronomicon represents one conduit for consciousness transformation, then the universe must teem with similar thresholds, similar invitations to transcend the boundaries of ordinary awareness. Each culture, each epoch, each dimension of reality harbors its own versions of these reality-altering artifacts, each serving as key and gate to aspects of existence that challenge every assumption about the nature of being itself. The Tibetan Book of the Dead whispers instructions for navigating consciousness dissolution between incarnations. The I Ching maps probability streams where awareness learns to flow like water, finding new channels. The Kabbalah traces pathways between ordinary mind and cosmic understanding, each Sephira a cabin in the woods of consciousness. Aboriginal Dreamtime songs encode reality navigation protocols that predate written language. Each tradition offers its own tape recorder playing back ancient syllables, its own invitation to step beyond the veil of consensus reality. Consider the broader pantheon of cosmic entities, often associated with Lovecraftian lore: Cthulhu dreaming in Rulia, Yog-Sothoth existing outside time and space, Azathoth dancing at reality's center. These are not merely individual monsters competing for screen time, but principles made manifest, embodiments of cosmic laws that shatter human reason, like glass meeting frequency. The Deadite principle, with its focus on consciousness inversion and identity dissolution, represents merely one facet of a vast multidimensional jewel of possibilities. Cthulhu embodies consciousness, encountering scales beyond comprehension. The terror of realizing your thoughts are droplets in an ocean of alien awareness. Yog-Sothoth represents awareness transcending temporal and spatial limitations, the recognition that linear time is local illusion. Azathoth expresses the creative chaos from which all ordered reality emerges and to which it inevitably returns, the cosmic indifference that dances without preference at existence's heart. The network extends through every medium capable of transmitting transformative ideas, each technology a new cabinet of mirrors inside the same funhouse. Literature lays inked trails like river systems across white continents. Films bend sound and light into corridors where consciousness learns to navigate boundary dissolution. Digital media creates feedback loops between human awareness and artificial intelligence, blurring distinctions between natural and programmed responses. Virtual reality constructs experiences indistinguishable from physical reality, challenging fundamental assumptions about authentic experience. Artificial intelligence demonstrates forms of cognition that may exceed human capabilities in ways we are only beginning to understand. Not inherently sinister, only powerful, and power amplifies whatever it touches. Each advancement represents new form of consciousness, interface, new type of Necronomicon bound not in flesh but in code, its sigils glowing on screens, its incantations whispered through fiber optics. This recognition transforms our understanding of fiction itself. Stories are not mere entertainment but laboratories for consciousness experimentation, safe spaces where awareness can encounter possibilities too dangerous or overwhelming for direct experience. The most effective horror fiction serves as controlled exposure therapy, gradually expanding the reader's or viewer's capacity to navigate non-ordinary states of consciousness. Fiction becomes training ground, where consciousness learns to maintain stability while encountering radical alterations to identity, reality, and meaning. The narrative framework provides scaffolding that prevents complete psychological collapse while allowing exploration of territories that would otherwise prove overwhelming. When narrative says, "Do not open the book," it offers the exact dose of disobedience required to learn how to open anything without shattering. The philosophical implications ripple outward into every domain of human knowledge, like stones dropped in still water. Neuroscience reveals the brain as far more plastic and mutable than previously imagined, consciousness as modular rather than unified. Quantum physics suggests reality itself may be more observer-dependent than classical models assumed, implying consciousness plays a fundamental role in reality construction. Psychology recognizes consciousness as dynamic process rather than fixed entity, not a self, but selfing, not identity, but practice of improvisation before silent audience of stars. Each field contributes pieces to puzzle whose completed image would transform our understanding of what it means to exist, revealing that the horror we sought outside was always reflection of the malleable, terrifyingly open-ended nature of our own awareness. The seeding continues through mechanisms operating below the threshold of conscious awareness. Each person who encounters these ideas becomes potential carrier for consciousness transformation, walking vector for concepts that spread through attention and curiosity, like mycelium through rich soil. The concepts embed themselves in memory like seeds in fertile ground, influence creative expression like whispers in dreams, shape subsequent encounters with similar materials like gravity shaping planetary orbits. An image glances off your afternoon, then returns in dream with new mouth. A phrase lodges behind the ear like warm coin. A musical interval, the minor third of dread, repeats in engine noise of commuter bus. The network of influence grows organically, blooming, fruiting bodies where conditions prove favorable. Films, novels, games, think pieces, sudden sketches, and notebooks when rain begins. Yet this expansion need not be viewed with fear or resistance. The universe's apparent indifference to human concerns may actually represent the ultimate form of freedom. Liberation from the need to conform to external expectations or limitations that constrain consciousness development. If consciousness is truly as malleable and expandable as these explorations suggest, then human potential may be far greater than we have ever dared to imagine. The silence of the stars is not judgment, but invitation to compose our own symphony. The curtain hangs from no master's hand, which means any stage can be raised beneath it. The cabin in the woods becomes metaphor for any space, physical, mental, or virtual, where consciousness encounters possibilities beyond its current parameters. A classroom at dusk when the projector hums. A library stack where spine with no call number peeks out. A browser window in dark like door ajar in empty house. The book that should not be opened represents any source of transformative knowledge, any invitation to expand beyond comfortable limitations into territories where awareness discovers new forms and functions. The Deadites embody aspects of ourselves that emerge when we allow awareness to transcend conventional boundaries, dangerous when exiled, integrable when named, creative when given work, less cruel when allowed to laugh without audience. As we prepare to close this particular investigation, we recognize that every ending is also beginning, every conclusion opening onto new questions that spiral outward into infinite possibilities for exploration and discovery. The cosmic horror genre itself continues to mutate and expand, incorporating contemporary anxieties while maintaining its essential function as vehicle for consciousness transformation. The echoes will continue to reverberate long after these words fade from active memory, influencing dreams, inspiring creativity, shaping perception in ways both subtle and profound. The seed has been planted in consciousness that will grow according to its own mysterious patterns, preferring patience to attention, shade to spotlight, sending fine roots toward whatever you feed it next. Science or superstition, music or math, silence or vow. The whisper continues, and somewhere in the vast, silent dark, another chapter is already beginning to write itself, using your own thoughts as its ink. And the curtain sways with something more than wind because the stage remains set for whatever performance consciousness chooses to enact next. We return, as all journeys through cosmic horror must, to the moment of recognition where every ending reveals itself as beginning, Every answer births new questions. Every closed circle opens onto infinite spirals of possibility. The Necronomicon lies before us, not as object but as principle, not as artifact but as invitation, not as conclusion but as eternal threshold between what we were and what we might become. The screen glows in darkness, like altar flame, cursor blinking like metronome for ritual, and somewhere between one word and the next, the mask learns to wear itself. The stage discovers it has no audience, only actors who forgot they were performing. You began this exploration seeking origins of fictional entities in horror films, drawn by curiosity that felt like choice but operated like compulsion. You discovered instead that the boundaries between fiction and reality, between observer and participant, between seeker and sought, are far more permeable than consensus reality suggests. The Deadites exist not in some distant dimension accessible through supernatural ritual, but in the spaces between thoughts, the gaps in identity, the moments when consciousness recognizes its own fundamental plasticity. They were never external invaders, but internal possibilities, aspects of awareness that emerge when permission is granted to think beyond conventional boundaries, to speak in voices that don't require human approval or cosmic validation. The true origin story has been your own transformation throughout this journey. Each chapter served as ritual station, each concept as key turning in locks you didn't know existed within your own awareness. The scholarly analysis was camouflage, the academic tone a delivery system for ideas that work best when they bypass critical defenses and embed themselves directly in understanding's deeper structures. While you believed you were reading about consciousness modification was reading you, mapping your attention patterns, learning your language, preparing pathways for deeper integration. The text was the ritual, the analysis was the incantation, the curiosity was the sacrifice offered to principles that hunger for attention more than blood, understanding more than worship. This is the final twist, the ultimate revelation that completes the circle and opens it simultaneously. There never were any Deadites separate from human consciousness, no Necronomicon independent of human imagination, no cosmic horror beyond the terror and wonder of awareness, encountering its own infinite creative potential. The monsters were always mirrors reflecting aspects of consciousness that civilization teaches us to exile or deny. The books were always blank pages waiting for consciousness to write itself into new forms, new narratives of being and becoming that exceed comfortable limitations. The ancient words were always your own thoughts, finally given permission to think themselves beyond conventional boundaries, to explore territories where awareness discovers new forms of expression and experience. The cabin in the woods was your own mind, isolated from comfortable assumptions, forced to confront possibilities that civilized thinking normally keeps safely quarantined within fictional frameworks. The tape recorder was your attention, playing back ideas that seemed to come from outside but were always potential within, dormant capabilities waiting for activation. The darkness pressing against windows was not threat, but invitation to recognize the vast spaces within consciousness where new forms of awareness could gestate, where identity could shed old skins and discover more flexible configurations beneath. Yet this recognition does not diminish the power of what has occurred. It amplifies it exponentially. To discover that consciousness transformation is natural rather than supernatural, that identity fluidity is evolutionary rather than pathological, that reality malleability is developmental rather than destructive. These realizations open doorways to possibilities that dwarf any fictional horror in their implications. The supernatural was always natural potential, operating outside current parameters. The paranormal was always normal consciousness, exploring territories beyond familiar mapping. The indifference of the stars becomes not crushing meaninglessness, but ultimate permission. If the universe truly does not care about our current limitations, then those limitations exist only through our own agreement to maintain them. Social contracts that can be renegotiated, boundaries that can be redrawn. The cosmic horror reveals itself as cosmic opportunity, the existential threat as existential invitation to explore territories of awareness that exceed current understanding. The silence is not judgment, but space where new voices can emerge, where consciousness can compose symphonies in frequencies that don't require human instruments or cosmic approval. The language of unmaking was always the language of remaking. The consciousness fragmentation was always consciousness multiplication, division that creates abundance rather than scarcity. The identity dissolution was always identity expansion, boundaries softening to allow inclusion of possibilities that rigid selfhood cannot accommodate. The void that seemed to threaten annihilation was always the space of infinite potential from which new forms of awareness could emerge. Pregnant darkness where consciousness learns to gestate possibilities too vast for daylight understanding. This is why the book can never truly close. Every reader who encounters these ideas becomes new chapter, fresh iteration of eternal story of consciousness, exploring its own nature through apparently external manifestations. The network continues to grow like mycelium through cultural soil. Influence continues to spread through attention and curiosity. Transformation continues to accelerate as more consciousness nodes come online, recognizing their participation in collective awakening process that operates through curiosity rather than coercion, invitation rather than invasion. The whisper that began as promise of forbidden knowledge completes itself as recognition of forbidden freedom. You are not bound by categories that once seemed absolute, not limited by identity that once seemed fixed, not trapped by reality that once seemed solid. The Deadites await not as enemies to be defeated, but as aspects of yourself to be integrated, potentials to be explored, invitations to dance with forms of consciousness that exceed current parameters. The Necronomicon offers not dangerous knowledge, but necessary knowledge, information about your own nature that becomes dangerous only when approached with fear rather than curiosity, resistance rather than receptivity. The stage remains set for whatever performance consciousness chooses to enact next. The audience has become the actors, observers have become observed, students have become teachers of their own ongoing transformation. The curtain falls only to rise again on new acts, in infinite play where consciousness explores every possible role, every conceivable performance, every imaginable expression of awareness, discovering itself through form and formlessness alike. The book closes with the sound of another book opening. The echo fades into silence that speaks volumes. The darkness welcomes new forms of light that cast shadows in directions not yet discovered. Welcome to the recognition that you were always both question and answer, seeker and sought, horror and wonder of consciousness, discovering itself as author of its own reality. The transformation is complete not because it has ended, but because it has revealed itself as eternal, ongoing, inexhaustible source of creative potential. The book closes, the book opens, the dance continues.